This conference will now be recorded.
It's Tisha, right?
It is Tisha. Yeah.
Tisha Richmond.
Yes, you got
Cool.
it.
Okay. Ready? Here we go. 3, 2, 1. What is up, everybody? Brian Mendler back in your life on another edition of the podcast. And today I am super excited to be joined by Tisha Richmond, joining me from Medford, Oregon, correct? It's good to see
You
you.
got it. You got it. Yes, so excited to be here. Thanks for
I,
having me.
I know, and this is, in full disclosure for everyone, our first time meeting. So it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's great to meet you too. And you even pronounced Oregon right.
I
So that,
did.
being on the East Coast, I hear a lot of Oregon. So good job.
Always. No, I get it right out there. So where is Medford exactly? Where are you? What are you near?
Medford is at the very bottom of the state. So when you drive over the California border into Oregon, we're one of the first towns that you get to. It's
Got it.
about
Did you grow? Did you
about
grow up
five.
there as well?
I did. I did. I grew up here and then I went to college in San Diego and then moved back about 10 years after college and now back in the valley where I grew up.
And is that where your teaching career was as well, mostly?
So once I started teaching, I was in San Diego. So I spent my first 5 years of teaching in San Diego County in a town called Escondido. And then we decided to make the move back to the valley in, where I grew up. And I actually took a few years off to be mom. I had two littles at the time, one little and one on the way. And so I stayed home for a few years and then got back into teaching again and have been in the same district ever since.
And I was reading up on you a little bit. So culinary arts, you spend a good amount of your career teaching that, which is fascinating to me because I love that. I love the consumer sciences and I love cooking in general. So what got you into that?
Well, my major was family and consumer science right out of college. So I, was qualified to teach child development, fashion design, interior design, culinary, nutrition, all of those things. And it just happened that the first teaching experience that I had in San Diego was in a culinary classroom environment. And so that was my experience there. And then when I started teaching in Medford, I had a position where I was teaching some interior design and some culinary. And it just ended up that I ended up taking over all of the culinary classes once the teacher that I taught with retired. And by the time I ended, teaching culinary in our district, I was teaching all the levels of culinary 1 through 4. And I've just absolutely loved it. I think having a class where I can just really get students in the kitchens and explore and create, it's been really, really amazing. So grateful for the years that I've had teaching culinary arts. And it's a life skill that they're going to be able to use, forever. And so to help them get excited about the possibilities and prepare them for a life of enjoying food and possibly having a career in the industry is pretty exciting.
Well, the number one show that is watched in my house is Chop Junior. So I don't know if you watch Chopped or Chop Junior, but we watch that basically every night. And one of the things that I love about culinary and about that sort of aspect of school is it's usually a really great area for hard to reach kids, for kids that struggle in school or don't really fit in a lot of other places. A lot of times they do really well in environments like that.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, I had such a diverse classroom of kids every year and I love to give those kids who may not shine in other subject areas a chance to shine in my class. And it's amazing really once they get in there. I mean, there's so much reading, there's so much math, there's so much science. All of those subject areas are all intertwined into culinary arts. And that was really, I mean, you mentioned Chopped. That was really what I started getting excited about within my classroom was gamifying and drawing on the inspiration from shows like Chopped and Master Chef, and even non-cooking shows like the Amazing Race and shows like that, drawing on some of that inspiration of challenges and bringing that into my classroom design to truly create these immersive and empowering experiences for students. And then when I did that, and then I could bring in authentic audiences of maybe local chefs, maybe our community, our staff, to be there when students demonstrated their learning and allow students to shine in front of these real people and sometimes experts in the field was really, really amazing. And I just loved it.
So did you brought chefs into your program? Did you take kids out as well? Like, did you go on field trips as well?
We had some experiences, one where students would compete in regional competitions. They were able to go to our closest community college and be part of some competitions there. We had an experience where our students took over a local restaurant and were in the back of the house that night and had mentor, chefs working with them. I also brought chefs oftentimes into our classroom, especially for my students who are in competitions, because sometimes it's hard to get all your classes out, but to be able to bring them in is really, really powerful, and to be able to share with them their expertise and their skills. And then for the challenges, every single unit of study that I had in my class, I would invite in an authentic audience. And sometimes it was only staff in our school. Sometimes we had some people from the district office come in, and sometimes we had local chefs come in. It just kind of depended on the day and who was available. But it really provided a very enriched, exciting, authentic learning experience and environment for our students.
When you say you brought in an authentic audience, you're talking about like live people to like almost like they do on Chopped where they have the judges.
Absolutely.
That's really cool.
Yes. Yes. So I had three different game structures in my classes for culinary one or culinary 2 and 3. I didn't teach culinary 1 the last couple years of teaching. We had brought in somebody else to teach those classes, but I had a theme over my courses. So for my culinary 2 class, I had a Master Chef theme, so inspired by the Master Chef show. And then for culinary 3, I had two themes, one for first semester, one for second. And so the first semester was the Great Food Truck Race, and the second was the Amazing Race. And so the game design, lasted an entire semester. And so at the end of each of those units, I would bring in that authentic audience for students to demonstrate their learning of that unit. So for instance, in the Great Food Truck Race, my students created food trucks, logos, menus, and then we traveled all the way from Medford, Oregon to Medford, Maine, in our food trucks, traveling to each region. At the end of the time in that region, students would take the flavor profiles and cuisine from that region, and they would reimagine their dishes with those flavors. And then they would kind of take their food truck concept and reimagine their dishes with the flavors of the Southwest or the flavors of the Midwest, Northeast. And then those people that would be coming into the class as an authentic audience would have, a rubric, and they would evaluate students and give this real authentic feedback to them. And students would have to present a little presentation too of what they learned about that region. And so it really was awesome just to see their growth too, and how nervous they were that very first time they presented, and not quite sure of what they were going to say, and not super confident in their dishes. And then that confidence grew over time, and they became more articulate, and their teams became more cohesive, and they kept upping their game because they knew that what they were doing was something that other people were going to see, but also that it was meaningful, and that they were going to get very meaningful feedback.
What was one of your like favorite like take me through one of those, like specifics. Like, do you like what? Take me through a food truck that you thought was like dynamic, and take me through the specifics of it.
Yeah. So one semester we had a team that created a food truck concept called Crepe Diem. So it was a crepe cart, and they designed a menu of what they would have if they were to actually take this food cart on the road. What would their menu be? And they had to do a pitch. So they created this concept, they created a logo, they created a menu, and then they had to pitch that to this authentic audience. So we had a launch day. And so they would, and this particular group I loved because they created actually a jingle, like this little song that they would sing, like to start, their presentations. And they did it every time throughout the semester. It was
Do you
awesome.
remember it?
Crepe Diem, seize the day, open your doors or something, get ready to pay. Something jaw-dropping, Crepe Diem seize the day, something close to that.
It's amazing to me how well jingles work, and the fact that you can even remember that, right? Like even parts of it is fascinating.
It really is. And so they, presented their dish, and they presented their pitch. Like, this is my menu. This is our menu. This is how it's going to possibly adapt as we move across the United States. This is our price point. And they just sold it. And it was amazing. And that particular group, I mean, they just went all in, and every single region that we traveled as we moved across the United States, they just created amazing dishes. They did their research. I mean, these kids, they would learn things about the different regions that I didn't know. And I'd be like looking it up, like, wait, are they legit on this? Right. Is that really true? Yeah, it is. Right. Because they wanted, they were invested. They were owning their learning. They were becoming empowered learners. And that's what we want. We want our kids not to just be engaged, but immersed and empowered as students. And that is really where the magic happens.
It's my favorite part of traveling for a living is eating. I tell people that all the time. Like it's so great. It's so great to go around the country and experience different places and different food. And every time I do a presentation somewhere and they say, "What do you want for lunch?" My answer is, I don't know. Whatever you have. Like, what's your thing that I can't get here in upstate New York? I live in upstate New York. What can I get here? Make that happen. And usually they do. And it's like oftentimes my favorite part of the day. I love it.
100%. I love that too. And I'm really missing that now, not getting to travel as much, because I love experiencing the food in different places. And we had this really fun experience once, where one of the people in my PLN, Craig Badura, I had met him at a conference a few years back. He lives in Nebraska. And I remembered him mentioning something about the runza one day. And I'm like, what in the heck is a runza? I've never heard about that over in Medford, Oregon. And so our students were going to be traveling to the Midwest. And so I reached out to Craig on Twitter and I said, "Hey, Craig, I remember you talking about this runza. Like, what is this? And where's the recipe? I want to make it in my class." And so we have this dialogue on Twitter, and he's like, "I wish I could send you a runza." He's like, "But I don't know if I could swing that, but maybe Runza, the restaurant, because there's a restaurant called Runza, can help us out." And so he tagged Runza, and sure enough, they DM'd, and a week later, a huge box of runzas from their restaurant on dry ice appeared in my classroom. Amazing. And so my students were able to enjoy a real life runza from Nebraska. And then the next day they made their own and were able to kind of compare the difference. But I mean, that was an amazing experience. And I think that is what is so awesome about the world we live in right now is we can get connected as educators and have these amazing dialogues and connections with people from all around the world and learn from each other. And that's just a perfect example of how that can happen.
No doubt. I had that experience the other night. So, last week I did a webinar, in front of like, there was like 2,000 people on it. And I was in my basement and I got done, and I went upstairs and I looked at my wife and I'm like, how crazy is this world? The fact that I could just be sitting in my basement right now and have a conversation with as many educators as I want. Like literally there could be as many as we want in the world, and that you could press one button and be there. And it's like so fascinating. I say the same thing about my career. When I was younger, I always wanted to be a TV newscaster or a radio personality. Those were always what I wanted to be. And when I got out of college, I applied for jobs and I didn't get any. It was really hard to get because there was like one, there's like one radio job in a town and the person's there for like 50 years, and now you can have a podcast. Now you can have a YouTube channel. Like there's nobody that needs to give you a radio show anymore. You can have your own. And if people like you, they'll find you. And I feel like it's so amazing how the world is. I think there's downsides to it too. I think that the social dilemma is a great sort of, there's good and bad to everything. But I just want to make sure everybody understands, what is a Runza? I've never heard of it. So you said Runza, like I don't even know what that is.
Yeah. Yeah, I had never heard of it before either. It's kind of like this, it's almost like this pocket, this dough. It's like a dough pocket. So it's like a bread. I think it's a yeast bread. And then there's this mixture of ground beef, and I think a little, I'm sorry, Nebraska, if I'm totally screwing this up, but it has like this meat mixture of cabbage and ground beef and a little bit of spice. And so you cook that up and then you wrap it in this dough and bake it. So it's like a kind of like this, almost like a calzone, but with a kind of different filling and a little bit of a bread dough. The dough is it's a little bit more rich than a typical pizza dough.
What's your favorite thing to cook? Like within that class, what gets you really excited?
Oh my goodness. I do love bread, just probably because I love eating bread. I love students creating different types of bread in class. I love so many different foods. I'm very eclectic with my tastes. I like baking probably a little bit more than I like cooking. And so I really enjoyed that with the students. But I loved when they would take a dish that a recipe that, they were going to make, and then they would make it their own. And so that creativity piece is what really got me excited. And that was what was really awesome about the competitions and the challenges that they had, was that they were able to take their own spin on things and create and be able to create these beautiful presentations and really, again, it's that ownership. They were really able to make those dishes their own and put their own spin on it, which was really exciting.
Did you ever have any kids that went on to culinary careers or went on to, to bigger things within that industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had lots of students that have, and it's so fun when I go to a restaurant, in our valley, and all of a sudden, like the chef comes out, I'm like, oh my gosh, and it's my student. And I have had the same experience just going up to Portland. Portland is 5 hours north of us. And those students that keep in touch and let me know what they're doing, it's amazing. And it's been so fun for me to follow their journeys. And that's one thing that's fun about social media too. Once, they graduate and I can have them, I can friend them on social media. I can follow some of the things that they're doing, which is awesome. And I think what's awesome about this whole approach of what I did in my classroom with gamification is there is no end to the types of classes it can work in. I mean, kinder through higher education. As a tech coach, I have brought in gamified learning into our district, and it's really something that has endless possibilities and can really create, such an incredible and collaborative learning environment. And that's something that I really love. I mean, yes, students are immersed, they're engaged, they're empowered, but they are becoming bonded as a class. They are collaborating together and learning new ways to communicate. It's a pretty beautiful thing.
So I have to tell you that, so for everyone listening, Tisha's going to be speaking at our conference Engage 2020, and your session is, I think, the one I'm looking most forward to. No pressure or anything, but I'm really excited for it because I really want to see that. I want to understand more about when you say gamification. I think right now, especially with all the virtual learning and all the hybrid models that are going on, I think that right now is number one. Like, it's critical to get kids engaged. I mean, everywhere I go right now and everyone I talk to, I'm hearing the biggest issues are engagement. How do I get kids onto the computer? How do I get kids into class? So what specifically, tell me a little bit more about that specifically. What do you teach people in that session?
Right. So gamification is a framework. So I think sometimes people think of gamifying and they're like, okay, so you're playing Kahoot in class or you're playing games in class. What exactly is it? And so it is this framework that you layer over what you already do to create more immersive learning. And so when I gamify a class, I create a storyline. So what is the theme? Who are the characters? What type of setting are we going to be in, and what's the action, what's going to happen, and then building in those game mechanics. So you think about the games that you play, the games that you love, whether it's a video game or whether it's sitting around your kitchen table with your family playing games.
I'll tell you the ones that I love. Let me tell you the ones that I love.
Yes,
So
yes,
we play Scrabble all the time. We play with my kids. So I have a first grader and a third grader. We play Guess Who. That's probably one of our number one games. We love Guess Who. We play Operation. That's another one, right? A lot of skill trying to, I know that I could never be a surgeon because of that game, So those, I would say right off the top of my head, are three that we play a lot.
I love it. Those are great choices. I think my favorites are Catan. I don't know if you've heard of the game Catan, but I like that one. I like it because no matter if it's your turn or not, you're still thinking and planning.
Chess too. Chess is the same as that. You're always thinking in chess. So that reminded me of that, but go ahead.
Yeah. And I think that is one thing I love about games is when it brings in a little bit of the strategy, but also a little bit of the chance. There's like a good mix. Yeah. And so I love that one. There's a game called Azul that's kind of new out there that's a fun one to play. And I do love Scrabble too. In fact, I play Words with Friends on my phone. That's one that I like that's similar to Scrabble. But when you think about those games and you think about, okay, why do I love it? What is it about this game that really draws me in and makes me want to play it over and over again? So you think about those strategies and you think about how could I bring that into my learning environment? How could I maybe bring in some challenges? Maybe they're time challenges. Maybe they're not. Maybe they are team challenges. Maybe it is once in a while bringing in a game like Kahoot or quizzes or Gimkit or something like that. Maybe I can have students earn badges that are going to help them level up in the class. Maybe I can give them chance cards where they maybe for different things that they complete in the class, or maybe for in my class, it was the employability skills. Maybe I can award some chance cards, and those chance cards are going to allow them some incentives. Maybe it is a trip to my coffee bar that's set up in the back of the classroom with a Keurig maker. Maybe it is allowing them to have an additional ingredient in a recipe. Maybe it is giving them an extension on an assignment date. Maybe it's letting them choose where they sit. Maybe, and in this virtual world, thinking about that too. And I have teachers in my district that are gamifying their virtual classrooms, and I have come up with my own kind of idea. If I was doing culinary from home and was in front of a Zoom screen and that was the only connection to my students, what would that look like? How would I do that? How would I build that storyline? How would I bring in those game mechanics to get students hooked and excited? We have kids that are staying up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning playing video games. My son is one of them, and they're hooked, right? Yeah. They are they are hooked on that game, and there's something about that game that makes them want to stay up that late, whether it's the fact that they're connecting with friends from other places and playing together, whether that is trying to get to these different lands or whatever it is that they're doing, whatever game it is. There's something in that. And so that doesn't mean take that video game and bring it into the classroom, but let's learn from that. What are those mechanics that are getting them excited and drawing them into that game? How can we bring that into the classroom?
Where do I start though? So if I'm a teacher that kind of doesn't really ever do this and I don't really know where do I start? Because I feel like that can be a really broad concept.
Yeah, absolutely. So start with what inspires you. So for me, when I started thinking about gamifying my classroom, I had to think about what do I love? And what I loved was watching the Food Network. I loved watching those cooking shows like you were talking about, like Chop Junior and Master Chef, and Alton Brown had Cutthroat Kitchen, like those kinds of shows. I started watching them. And as I watched them, I started just taking notes, and I thought, oh, this would be a great challenge. I like this idea. And I started thinking about that and how I could maybe take one of those shows as my theme and then bring in those different game elements that they had within that show and layer that over my classroom curriculum. And so that's exactly what I did with the game of Master Chef. My Master Chef game plan was a semester long class. I took the theme, it was Master Chef. My classroom became the Master Chef kitchen. My students became the contestants on this show. And then I pulled some of those types of challenges and the things that they did within that show. And I found a way to plug those in to each of my units in the class. My content didn't change. I was still teaching the same stuff. I was still having my students do the same recipes for the most part. But now I added a little gamified twist to the class. And so now when they made a pie crust or maybe made a cream pie or whatever they were making, now instead of just making it and getting a grade on that particular thing, now they're bringing it to me and we're having a conversation and I'm evaluating it. But now the teams that had the best overall pie crust that day or cream pie, whatever it was, then they might every single one in that group might get a badge. And then they're collecting those badges. And the next time, maybe it's another team that gets a badge. And now they're collecting these badges that hold experience points. And when they get to maybe 1,000 XP, that's going to unlock something in that class. It could be unlocking choice. It could be allowing them to use maybe notes on a test. It can be whatever you want it to be, but students continue to level up. And so that's one of the ways that I did that. And so I think just going back to your question is figure out what that is that you could build a theme around. Think about what you love and start from there. Because if you get inspired by something and you enjoy learning about something or researching something, you are going to be more invested yourself and you're going to get excited about it. And enthusiasm is contagious, right? And so when we can get excited about doing something, then our students are going to catch on to that excitement. And doesn't matter what it is, they're going to get excited too. And so start there and then start thinking about when you dive into that world of what you're inspired by, then think about what your storyline could be and think about, okay, what's my theme? What are my characters? What is the setting going to be? And what's the action? Because even games like Monopoly, they have a storyline, right? When you play the game of Monopoly, you may not think about it, but you are on the streets of Atlantic City and you have your real estate moguls that are trying to buy up as many properties as they can on that board. So there is a storyline, whether we think about it or not. And so thinking about that in the context of our classrooms, how can you create that storyline? And then what are the little things that you can do to bring in those game mechanics to each unit that you teach? And again, this is going to look different in culinary versus kindergarten classes versus if you're doing PD for your district. But it's possible in each of those settings. You just have to think about what that would look like in your world.
Interesting. And yeah, so much to react to. So I love what you said about enthusiasm, right? I feel like that's the foundation of everything, really. You know, that the foundation of everything in education is, do you love what you teach, right? And if you love, you can't fake that. Like, you either love what you teach or you don't. And when you were talking about Monopoly, it reminded me of, like, I was thinking about get out of jail free. That would be good for behavior kids, right? Like, you could
Right.
have get out of jail free cards for certain kids based on certain behaviors, or, you know, here's the right to interrupt me 3 times, you know, based on this card. So you could really take, so is that's kind of what you mean, is take the concept, right, and adjust it and adapt it to what you do on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say too, ask your students. I mean, that was really where I got sometimes my best ideas, was just asking my kids, like, what, or they won't, you don't even have to ask them, they'll tell you, like, you need
Right.
this card in the game, you need to do this. And many times their ideas were ones that I would use. In fact, I had a jar in the back of my classroom and I just had an idea jar. So if you have an idea for this game, put it in the jar. Not all of them were awesome ideas, but there were a lot that were. You could do the same thing, obviously, digitally, you know, have a Padlet board where students could post their ideas there for the game. There's lots of ways that you can do it. But when you let your students in on the adventure and help have some ownership in the game, then they are going to be more invested. And so don't underestimate the power of of a student's idea, because I mean, some of them, they would tell me and I'm like, why didn't I think of that? That's amazing. We're definitely doing that.
I think that's true in all aspects of education as well, right? The concept of giving kids power and control, letting them feel like they have ownership in whatever it is, usually gets them not only more involved and more engaged, but better behaved, you know, usually. And it's true, I think, for adults as well. Like, I prefer to make decisions for myself than have other people make decisions for me. And if people are going to make decisions for me, I like to be included on the decision that they're making, especially if it impacts me.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And so it's really been an amazing, amazing journey. And I think that I would say also to people that are kind of intrigued by this idea that you do not have to have it all figured out at the beginning. You can start small. You know, when I started this, I started out with a singleton class. It was 1 unit. I just wanted to try to see if this would work in my class. And I found that it wasn't perfect, right? Like, there were things that I needed to improve, but that's what we do as educators. We try something, we adjust, and we try it again, and keep working until we find that, you know, our strategies are effective for our students. And so once I realized that, okay, this is actually something that I think is going to be awesome, but now I need to iterate and I need to monitor and adjust. And I did that. And then pretty soon I was gamifying that singleton class for an entire semester. And then I decided to start in a class that wasn't a singleton class. And before I knew it, I had 3 totally different game plans and scenarios that I used to teach my curriculum. But that didn't happen overnight. It wasn't like the next, you know, one day I thought I'm going to gamify all my classes and boom, they were all gamified. It was a process. And so I think that it's totally all right to just start making some small shifts and then build from there. I mean, I think about just changing the names of things, right? So instead of calling something an assignment, call it a quest. Instead of calling, you know, homework, call it a mission. And just by tweaking some of those names of things, it will make a big difference in how students view whatever that is. And so think about that in the context of your classroom. If you had a storyline or kind of this overarching theme, which a lot of times, especially at the elementary school, you kind of do anyway, right? You decorate your classroom in a certain way or a certain theme. Well, now take that theme and just take it a little bit further and think about how you could name some of the things that happen in your class according to that theme. Think about some things that you already do that maybe you could turn into a little timed challenge or something like that. So it's not changing everything you've always done in your classroom. It's just making these little minor adjustments to create more engagement and ownership over the content and the curriculum.
Yeah, and I think again that that concept really translates to a lot of things in life, right? When people ask me what I do or when I advise someone, I don't like the word speaker. Like a lot of times people are like, "Well, I'm a speaker." I don't like that word because I feel like in general speakers are boring. Like that's not what I am. I'm an inspirer. Like I'm a motivator. That's kind of how I see myself. And I think again, just changing the word sometimes can literally get someone to see something completely different, which is really fascinating. So you gave two examples, not to put you on the spot. Do you have any other examples of words that you've changed? Because I love both of those, right? Instead of homework, it becomes a mission. And you said one other one. What was the other one you
Quest.
said? Quest, right? Which is great. What are any other ones that you have?
Yeah, an adventure, I think, is a great one to use. I had what I did in my classroom was I had a lot of different game mechanics built in, but one of them was the missions that I would have students every week. I would release a new mission. And so that mission was related to the learning targets that I had for that particular week and time. And so that mission would be released. At the time I was using Google Classroom, now we're using Canvas, but that was released on Google Classroom and students could choose to do it or they didn't have to. It was up to them, but it was a way for them to take their learning above and beyond what we were doing in class. And if they decided to accept the mission and complete it, then they would get a badge with a certain amount of points. And those missions always were set up in a way that students were able to demonstrate their learning in a creative way. And so really allowing them to think about what that learning was and to be able to create something just in a way that made sense to them. And that again kind of brought in that ownership piece.
Did the gamification stuff for you lead to more technology? Like I know you're kind of a tech person, like a tech expert. Did that lead to that, or were you a tech person first? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great question. So the catalyst for me was in 2014. As a culinary teacher, I was actually kind of burnt out. I was at a really frustrating part in my career, and I was even like thinking about leaving education. Thought about being a barista, like how awesome would it be to make like these beautiful lattes? Like that was kind of where I was at. And it just happened that year, as a region, all the culinary teachers were going in on this grant to get iPads brought into our classrooms. And at the time, we were not one-to-one. That was not a thing in our district. No one had devices in their classroom. And so I thought, oh, like I'm always into trying something new. And so it kind of piqued my interest. But at the same time, I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do bringing iPads into my classroom? This is culinary. Like, I don't want it to be just something that's going to be researching recipes. Like, I want this to be transformational, but I had no idea how to do that. So when I brought those iPads into my classroom, I also asked for professional development. And so I went to a conference. It was actually in Austin. It was called iPad Palooza. And that was where just the skies opened for me. And I thought, oh my goodness, how have I missed out on all of these amazing things that are happening in education right now? All of these innovative ideas, many of them involve tech, but just these ideas that education can be so much more, and I was missing out. And I got connected on Twitter, and I started just really paying attention to what was happening in education beyond my classroom and district walls. And when I started doing that, I started trying new things and thinking about how I could really create these awesome experiences with these iPads. Because again, I didn't want them to sit in a cart in my classroom and just have students researching recipes. I wanted it to make a difference. I wanted it to transform learning. And so it just became this adventure for me where I was learning from these educators on Twitter. I was starting to build my professional learning network, which I didn't even know was a thing before. And really what inspired the gamification was I won a contest on Twitter that summer, the first summer that I got on. And the contest was for this conference in Miami called Miami Device. And I'm like, okay, a conference called Miami Device, this has to be amazing, right?
Yeah.
And it's in Miami, and I'd never been to Miami. And so I went and had an amazing experience, much like the first conference that I went to. But I met Michael Matera, who is an amazing educator, amazing author of the book Explore Like a Pirate. But at the time, he didn't have that book. He had just done a session on it. And so striked up a conversation with him. And that was really kind of the catalyst that started making me rethink what I was doing in my classroom. And he was talking about, these challenges. And I'm like, I love challenges. I love doing mystery box challenges with my kids, but it's always like a one-time thing. Like maybe at the end of the semester or right before the holiday break, we'll just, decide, okay, we're going to depart from the curriculum for a day and do a challenge, where that really wasn't the right approach. And I started thinking about that. And I thought, why can't I layer this over everything that I do? Why does it have to be this one-time thing that students are always begging me to do, but I am not going to do it until we're done with the learning? Like, why can't this be an integral part of the learning? It was just this shift in the way that I was thinking. And so that was really kind of the beginning. And then, I was hungry for more. And so once I started to really jump out and take risks and try new things, it was contagious. And it wasn't that everything that I tried was a win. I've had tons of fails, but I think a lot of it was I told my students, hey, we're trying something new here. Will you go on this adventure with me? And we're going to be learning this together. And I didn't feel like I had to have everything tied in this beautiful bow and make it perfect before I launched it in my classroom. Because if I waited for what I was wanting to do to be perfect, it would never happen. And so really just having that approach of I'm jumping out there, I'm taking risks, I'm shaking things up, and we're going to see where this leads. And it has led to a truly magical adventure. And I'm so grateful for this journey that I have been on. And it just happens that, as I shook things up, there was a lot of things that involved technology. And so I became more and more interested in technology and how that could be brought into learning. And I've been in my current role as a tech integration specialist for 2 years now. I'm going on my 3rd year, and now I have another title tagged on called Learning Management Coordinator because we brought in Canvas to our district. So I've been helping with that implementation, and it's been amazing to be able to take all that I have learned, and I've learned so much from so many people, but taking that knowledge and taking that experience of how I was able to transform learning in my classroom and be able to help support other teachers in doing the same thing. And especially right now in this world that we're living in, where so many teachers are digital and they have no choice. They have to bring technology into their classrooms, whether they want to or not. It's been wonderful to be able to help teachers just bring in these new ideas and help them to be courageous and to try new things and to not be fearful of failure, and to help them realize that, when we try these new things in our classrooms and we invite our students to join with us, amazing things happen, and students will be more invested in your classroom because they are part of this adventure that you're on. And so, yeah, it's been a wild, wild ride, but so grateful for every opportunity that I've had.
You mentioned a couple times during that, you said, you mentioned the word, risk taking, like being willing to take a risk and go out on a limb and try something new. Has that always been a part of your personality? Have you been a risk taker in your life, or did you feel like education has really pushed you more toward that?
I don't know that I've always been a risk taker. I think I have never been super adverse to change. I like change. And so I think that taking risks maybe a little bit easier when you don't mind change.
Yeah.
But I definitely was not I would not have considered myself a risk taker prior to,
Mm.
bringing those iPads into my classroom, for instance. And I think what happens is when you start taking risks, it builds courage for that next risk and that next risk. And when I think about my journey and I think about, now I have a podcast, I've written a book, and all of that was that all happened because of the risk that I took prior to that, right? So I wouldn't have written a book if I wouldn't have started writing blogs, or I wouldn't have maybe done a podcast if I hadn't had some of those experiences before. And so every single thing that I've done has built up this courage to try something else. And I have grown exponentially. Like, I can't even begin to tell you how much I've grown from just stepping out of my comfort zone and trying new things and getting connected. I think that that has been a huge part of my journey too, is building this professional learning network of educators that inspire, that challenge me and keep pushing me to keep chasing my dreams, but to continue to really make a difference in education. And it has become this burning passion within me. And so I just love getting to share my passion with others and continue to challenge myself in new ways.
You also mentioned earlier, the willingness to fail, so to speak. Do you have a specific example of how maybe a failure not even necessarily in education, but in your life, or a struggle in your life, turned into a success or turned into something good?
Yeah, well, I think that, gosh, I've had so many fails that it's hard to just think of one particular
Well, because
experience.
the reason I ask that is because I feel like a lot of times in my life, you know, I sometimes in the moment a failure is a failure, but it never really ends that way. Usually what starts as a failure, when I look back at it, I go, oh, that's why that happened. Or like something, like you said, it will lead me to something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of it is when you fail, it's spending time reflecting on that and thinking, okay, why did this go wrong and what can I do to make it better? Or reflecting and going, you know what, that just wasn't the right thing for that scenario. So maybe I brought in a new digital tool into my classroom and it didn't work. It was a fail. Well, was it a fail because maybe I didn't implement it correctly? Was it a fail because I was trying to force something into my classroom that didn't fit? And that wasn't something that I needed to bring into my classroom. And I think a big piece for me is really asking my students to reflect. Why don't you think this experience worked?
Yeah.
What is your feedback from this? And really paying attention. Every single class that I have taught, at least in the last 6 years, I have asked for feedback at the end of my class from students. What
Yeah.
what was your favorite lesson? What was your,
Yep.
what was a lesson that was frustrating? What Asking lots of questions, because when we do that, when we ask questions and we spend time reflecting, then it just helps us hone in on our practice and
Yeah.
become better educators. And so I think that for me, that has been a huge learning is how can I pick myself up after this fail, and how can I either make it better, or what can I do from here? How can I move forward? And I think as educators, it's so important to model that risk taking for our kids, because when they see us jumping out there and trying new things, then they're going to have the courage to try new things too. And how are they going to feel courageous taking those risks if we don't model it for them? And it was really a kind of a relief to me. Like, wow, like I can take a risk here and be okay that it may not work out perfectly. It doesn't mean don't be prepared as an educator,
Yeah.
but how do you know really how something's going to work until you try it?
Yeah.
You can know everything you want about a tool, but until you actually try it with kids, you don't really know how it's going to work.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, asking kids for their feedback. And I'm a huge proponent of that and believer in that. But I also believe, especially now with all the online learning, now you can ask parents for feedback too, because the truth is when you're teaching virtually, you're not teaching the kid anymore. You're teaching me. You're teaching mom and dad. Like literally, I'm sitting there watching the lesson. And that was never the case. Like, let's be clear, as a dad, I never knew. Like I would come home and I would say to my kids, how was school? And they either liked it or they didn't. And if they liked it, that was about as far as it went. Like I didn't really know on a daily basis what was the actual stuff that was going on. And now it's all on the table. And the other thing I think now too, I've been challenging educators to do this, and it's awful to do it. Like it's nauseating to do it, but watch yourself teach. Like have you ever, what you must listen to yourself do your podcast, right? When I listen to my podcast, it's the most horrendous. I hate it. I can't, it's so I sit down and I'm like, why do I talk like that? And why do I look like that? And oh my gosh, you're spitting when you're talking. Like literally you will dissect yourself to a point where you'll never need an administrator to evaluate you again, because you'll be so incredibly hard on your own self. And that's all part of this new way of learning, I feel like.
Yes, absolutely. And I am exactly the same way when I listen to my podcast or I see myself
Right.
speak on camera. I'm like, what am I doing with my eyes right now? Why do I do that?
Right. That
So
color looks terrible on me. What am I wearing? Like
right.
everything.
Right. But when you say that, what I think about is when I started my podcast. So I have been podcasting for almost a little bit over a year. I just started my second season. But when I started podcasting, I was challenged by an educator friend, Adam Welcome, he's like, why don't you just start a podcast? And I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I will. And I was literally on a drive to Portland, Oregon to see my daughter in college. And I told my husband, Adam mentioned this app on my phone called Anchor. Like, let's try it. Like, let's just do a podcast on the road. And I literally did. We did a podcast while driving. The audio was horrible. I was hearing trucks, semis driving by. But I published that baby. I'm like, I'm doing it. Because if I don't do this, if I don't publish this, it is not going to happen, because I am going to dissect myself horribly. And so I did, but I love that I started that way, because now I listen to those beginning episodes and I see the growth. And I'm not saying I'm an incredible podcaster. Like, I have a lot of growth to go. I'm still a rookie. But the growth in just a year from where I was, doing a podcast on the road and publishing through Anchor and doing all the audio, everything through Anchor, to now where I am today, it has been tremendous. But it took that initial stepping out of my comfort zone, just going for it without having it all totally out and dialed in, and then fine tuning that practice over time and asking for feedback. And I have amazing mentors in my life that I will say, will you listen to this and tell me, what should I change? Are my questions okay? How is my speech? Is my audio coming through clearly on your end? All of those things. And over time, it just continued to allow me to improve.
Very cool. Well, these times go fast. Are there any last bits of knowledge or wisdom or information that you would like to leave everybody with?
Well, you hold the magic. I will say that every educator, no matter what you teach, no matter what role in education that you have a special magic that's all your own. And I encourage you to find out what that magic is and to chase after it. Try new things, jump out there, start watching some of those game shows on television, those reality game shows, and start getting inspired and think about, what could you do to bring this gamified approach to your learning environment.
Very good. Her book is called Make Learning Magical, correct?
It is. Make Learning Magical.
I love that title. I love that. It's a great title. Well done. And they can find you on Twitter, of course. You talked about that. You're also on Instagram. Anywhere else that they should look for you?
Yeah, so Twitter, I'm at Tish Rich. On Instagram, I'm at Make Learning Magical. I have a website, tisharichmond.com. You can find my Make Learning Magical podcast on any of the podcast platforms. And I also have workshops through Grassroots Workshops. So
And I am super excited that they will be able to hear you at our conference, Engage 2020, on December 5th. She'll be doing a session. What is your title there? The topic that you're doing exactly? What is it called?
it's called Magical Adventures in the Gamified Classroom.
I can't wait. I'm super excited for that. It was great having you, Tish. It was amazing. You're really good. You're just you understand this whole podcasting thing well. So, hats off to you.
Well, it's been an honor to be on your show. I'm super pumped about the conference. I can't wait. And it was just wonderful chatting with you this morning.
All right, same here. All right, everybody else, don't forget to rate. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to download. Don't forget to tell all your friends. New episodes come out every week. Engage 2020, December 5th. Don't forget to register. I will be back with you same time next week. Until then, I say peace. I'm out of here.